I know all of you are really excited for the concept of perceptual mapping. The good thing about perceptual mapping is I'm just giving you some theory or some analysis techniques. It's not something you're going to actually have to do. Although if you ever go into research, maybe you will do perceptual mapping. So there are kind of a couple different ways to do this, but what it is trying to understand perceptions of your business, your brand, your organization, whatever it is you're trying to understand, and seeing how successful you are at what you're doing. And there are a number of ways to do this. There are more general ways and there are less general ways. One of the most common ways is to do performance and importance testing. And so what you do in this is you give people a series of questions and you give them the same questions twice and you ask them to rank it. On a scale of 1 to 10, how important is this aspect to you? And then that same exact aspect, on a scale of 1 to 10, how well do we perform that aspect? And so it's going to give you a list of importance and performance measures. And then what you do is you measure them against each other to tell whether or not you're doing them successfully. And so I have an example here that's looking at brand A versus brand B as far as importance and testing. However, what you're going to normally see is rather than comparing brands, you're looking individually on one brand. Now, this specific visual from your book is a one way to map it. A lot of times, instead of seeing just the single quadrant, you'll actually see 4 quadrants, which is what we're going to see in the next example. And so in this, there's a scale of importance from 1 to 10 on your y-axis and relative performance from 1 to 10 on your x-axis. And on this, you're going to see that there are certain things that we perform really, really high, that we do really, really high, but they're just not that important. Something like good entertainment. You guys have great entertainment. Fantastic. Wonderful. This, by the way, this is a casino. So you have great entertainment. That's fantastic. That's wonderful. I really don't care. So maybe we're putting a little bit too much emphasis on the good entertainment when it's just not that important. Now, then you have something that maybe is really, really important, but you're just not performing on, something of your promotions. Hey, we think promotions are super important, but you guys just don't do them. Your performance is terrible. So then you're going to get things like the values of promotion or the service packaging. Then there might be things that just really aren't that important and you don't perform them well, which is good because if you're investing a lot of time into something people don't care about, then you're wasting time. So you see something like non-smoking. Performance, pretty decent, it's midway, but it's just not that important to us anyway. Now, the really important thing is when we have high levels of importance and high levels of performance, that means we're doing something right. Something like the Great Slot Club and feeling safe. These are two things that are both not only highly important, but you're performing very well. And so we want to continue to do this. So this is just giving us a perceptual map of things that our guests find important and how well we're performing on those levels to determine maybe where we should allocate some of our resources. Now, like I said, this is on a simple quadrant, X and Y axis. You might also see it on a 4-quadrant scale where 0 being the mid-level and then maybe 1 to 5 would be on your left-hand side, and then you'd have 6 or 5 to 10 on your right-hand side. And so you would do it quadrantly this way. Usually this is a little bit easier to understand simply because you can name your different quadrants, like needs work could be something where you have high levels of importance but low levels of performance. So maybe this upper left-hand quadrant is going to be called needs work. Doing really awesome could be your upper right-hand quadrant and so forth. And so you can name the quadrants and maybe get a better visual of what things need to do and what things need to look at. And so here's some examples of questions that you might ask for mapping. If it is located off campus, I make a food purchase and run other errands, I don't even remember where I got these questions. They're not really important. But it's something like the fact that, number 7 here, I can serve myself. How important is that to you? How well do we perform at that? And then you would map that out. And so these are just some question examples that are really important. And then here is the cluster map. And so cluster map is another way of perceptual mapping. It's a little bit different, similar concept, but rather than doing discriminant analysis, you're doing cluster analysis. Again, you don't need to know that. If you ever go into research, they'll teach you more about that. But this is just another visual representation. Each of those numbers represents one of those questions. So like number 7, we talked about the fact that I can serve myself. Based on this analysis, we're finding that it is important and it is performed relatively well. And so we're seeing that staunchly in that quadrant that says you're doing pretty good. You could always do a little bit better, but we're doing really well in that quadrant. Some other examples of this here are perceptions of soft drinks. So rather than asking about individual qualities within a certain product or service, is what we saw with the casino and what we just saw with the restaurant, this is looking at comparing brands or comparing images or comparing different elements within those drinks. And so you can see the drinks are listed on here as well as different qualities within those drinks. So it's just a little bit interesting. Another example of this is with different kinds of drinks here, of looking at expense, how healthy they are, whether they're environmentally friendly, whether they're luxurious, and then putting brands together. And then you'll see these circles. Those are called clusters, and that's when we would group those items together. So this is, you could either group perceptions together, you could group items together, you could group brands together. So if we were doing a perceptual map of brands of restaurants or brands of hotels or brands of event companies or brands of cruise lines, whatever the case may be, based on certain qualities or perceptions. Maybe we group some together and say, okay, we're going to call these the biological cluster because they have to do with non-GMO. And we're going to call this group the luxury traditional because it's traditional milk, but it's fancy. We're going to call this the just generic healthy milk, you know. So we're creating the labels for these clusters based on similar qualities or characteristics that we're putting together. So again, just looking at a little bit of the theory of how we do this kind of analysis of perceptual mapping. It's just a way of understanding the marketplace, understanding consumer perceptions, consumer behaviors, and decision-making models. And then this one's kind of fun. This again is cluster analysis based on brands, and so what they did is they asked people where to put these on the spectrum, and they found these clusters. They have their youthful things with, you know, you see a lot of youthful characteristics of little teddy bears or little animal things on there, or colorful things. Then you have the mature ones, the ones that are going more for adults versus fun and tasty versus healthy cookies, which kind of defeats the purpose of a cookie to have it be healthy. I'm sure you all want to eat something called fruit digestive. I think I'd rather just not eat the cookie. But, you know, again, looking at perceptions and branding and cluster mapping. So this is just some theoretical background. You don't really need to know too much about it other than kind of the generic idea of what it does and the importance in performance testing.